The island where everyone remembers you. The first person on the island to recognize Daniel Vale was a woman selling peaches beneath a striped awning. Daniel had been on the island for less than 4 minutes. He had just stepped off the ferry with one canvas bag over his shoulder and was standing at the edge of the harbor, trying to decide whether the road climbing between the whitewashed houses led toward his hotel or merely toward somebody's laundry. The morning was warm already. Beyond the harbor wall, the sea stretched blue and bright beneath a pale sky. Small fishing boats rocked against their ropes. Somewhere nearby, coffee was being ground, and the smell drifted through the salt air with the sweetness of figs and warm bread. Daniel unfolded the little paper map the ferry clerk had given him. That was when the woman beneath the awning looked up. She was perhaps 60, broad-shouldered and deeply tanned, with silver threaded through her dark hair. For a moment, she simply stared. Then her whole face changed. "Daniel?" He lowered the map. "Yes?" The woman pressed one hand against her chest. "Well," she said, "look at you." Daniel glanced behind him. There was no one there. The ferry had already begun backing away from the quay. The woman came around her stall. "You finally came back." "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "Do we know each other?" She stopped. Her smile remained, but something quieter entered it. "Of course we do." Daniel gave an awkward laugh. "I think you've mistaken me for someone." The woman studied him carefully. Then she reached into a wooden crate and selected a peach. She held it out. "Still the yellow ones," she said. "You never liked the white peaches." Daniel looked at the fruit. It was absurd but true. He had disliked white peaches since childhood. "How did you know that?" The woman's expression became almost tender. "Because you told me." "When?" "Many times." Daniel did not take the peach. The woman looked toward the departing ferry, then back at him. "Perhaps you should go see Tomas." "Who is Tomas?" That made her laugh, not cruelly, almost sadly. "Oh, Daniel," she placed the peach in his hand. "Go up the blue steps. Turn left at the fountain. You'll find the restaurant with the green shutters." "I have a hotel reservation." "Yes, at the Miramar." Daniel stared at her. She nodded toward the hill. "Keep going past Tomas's place. Second courtyard on the right." Daniel slowly folded his map. "How do you know where I'm staying? You always stayed there." "I've never been here." The woman's smile disappeared. Behind them, the ferry sounded its horn. Daniel turned. The boat was already halfway across the glittering harbor mouth. When he looked back, the woman had returned to her peaches. She picked one up, polished it against her apron, and said, as though they had merely been discussing the weather, "Go see Tomas." Daniel stood for another moment. Then he put the peach into his bag and started up the hill. The island was called Bellora. He had chosen it almost accidentally. For 3 months, Daniel had been traveling alone through southern Europe without much of a plan. He was 43, recently finished with a job he had held for 17 years, and in possession of more free time than he had known what to do with. His former colleagues called the trip a sabbatical. His sister called it a delayed nervous breakdown. Daniel called it traveling. The truth lay somewhere between the two. He had spent 2 weeks in Rome, 5 days in Naples, several quiet afternoons in villages whose names he sometimes forgot by the following morning. He had walked through museums, eaten alone at little tables, and become surprisingly good at watching other people live their lives. Bellora had appeared on a map pinned behind the desk of a guest house, a small island, barely 12 miles long, no airport, one ferry each morning from the mainland, and another in late afternoon. Daniel had looked at the name and experienced the strangest sensation. Not recognition, something softer, like hearing the first few notes of a song he ought to know, so he had bought a ticket. Now, climbing the blue steps beneath walls covered in flowering vines, he wondered whether that had been a mistake. The village rose steeply from the harbor. Narrow streets wandered between white and honey-colored buildings. Wooden shutters stood open to the morning. Cats slept on warm stone ledges. A baker arranged round loaves in a window. Several people looked at Daniel as he passed. Most simply looked. One old man sitting outside a barber shop lowered his newspaper. Daniel kept walking. At the fountain, he turned left. The restaurant with green shutters was exactly where the peach seller had said it would be. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Tomas, fish, wine, whatever is good today." Daniel nearly smiled. There were 6 tables outside beneath a canopy of grapevines. An elderly man was setting one of them. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Daniel approached. "Excuse me, are you Tomas?" The man looked up. The fork slipped from his hand. It struck the stone pavement with a small, bright sound. Neither man moved. Then Tomas whispered, "Daniel." Daniel felt something tighten beneath his ribs. "I think there's been some confusion." Tomas came closer. He had a narrow, weathered face and clear brown eyes. "You've gotten gray." "So have you," Daniel said automatically. Tomas stared at him. Daniel stared back. "I don't know why I said that." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Tomas bent slowly and picked up the fork. "Sit." "I should probably." "Sit." There was enough authority in the old man's voice that Daniel obeyed. Tomas disappeared inside. Daniel considered leaving. Instead, he listened to the grape leaves moving overhead. Tomas returned carrying a small cup of coffee and a glass of water. "No sugar," he said. Daniel looked at him. "I take 1 sugar. You started taking 1 sugar after you left." Daniel's hand stopped halfway toward the cup. "How could you possibly know when I started taking sugar?" Tomas sat opposite him. "I don't. But you just... I know that when you were here, you drank it without." Daniel leaned back. "Tomas, I have never been on Bellora." The old man regarded him for a long. Finally, he nodded. "All right. That's it?" "No." Tomas folded his hands on the table. "But I believe that you believe it." Daniel almost stood. Then Tomas said, "You came here 21 years ago." Daniel remained seated. "You were 22, thin, serious, always carrying a notebook you hardly ever wrote in." Daniel said nothing. "You arrived in May. You were supposed to stay 3 days. A breeze stirred the vines. You stayed until September." Daniel looked toward the street. A woman pushing a bicycle passed and glanced at him twice. "What was I doing here?" "Trying to decide what to do with your life." Daniel laughed once. "That does sound like me at 22. You wanted to become an architect." The laughter stopped. Daniel had studied architecture for 1 year. Almost no one knew that anymore. He had changed degrees, eventually gone into financial consulting, and built a respectable career around spreadsheets, negotiations, airports, and hotel conference rooms. "How do you know that?" "You drew my terrace." Tomas pointed upward. Daniel followed his hand. Above the restaurant was a small 2nd-story terrace supported by pale stone arches. "You said the old one blocked too much light. You drew another." "My brother built it." Daniel stared at the arches. They were simple, elegant, and terribly familiar. "I didn't design that." "You argued with me for 2 weeks about those columns." "I didn't." "You said square columns would make the place look like a government office." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Tomas?" "Yes?" "Did you know another Daniel Vale?" "No." "Someone who looked like me?" "No." "Did I have some kind of accident here?" "No." "Then what exactly are you telling me?" Tomas considered the question. "That 21 years ago, you came to Bellora. And I'm telling you I didn't." "Yes." "You don't find that strange?" "Very." Daniel waited. Tomas rose. "Are you hungry?" "No, you will be." He disappeared into the restaurant again. Daniel sat beneath the vines, bewildered. He thought of leaving. The afternoon ferry departed at 5. There was plenty of time. Tomas returned carrying a plate. On it was grilled sea bass, roasted tomatoes, potatoes with rosemary, and a wedge of lemon. Daniel stared. "This was your favorite." "It's a fairly common meal. Not the way you ate it." Tomas placed a small bowl beside him. Inside was a dark green sauce. Daniel smelled basil, parsley, olive oil, and something sharp. "Orange peel," Tomas said. Daniel tasted it. Something happened. Not a memory. There was no image, no forgotten scene returning suddenly to consciousness. It was more like a door inside him shifting on its hinges. For 1 second, Daniel could almost feel an evening that had never happened. Warm stone beneath his bare feet. Voices downstairs. A table beneath grape leaves, someone laughing. Then it vanished. He put down the fork. Tomas watched him. "You felt something." Daniel looked away. "I'm tired, of course. I was traveling yesterday." "Of course." "I should check into my hotel." Tomas nodded. Daniel stood. He reached for his wallet. Tomas waved it away. "I'm paying." "For what?" "For being 21 years late." Daniel shouldered his bag. At the street, Tomas called after him. "Daniel." He turned. The old man was standing beneath the vines. "You were happy here." Daniel did not know why those words affected him more than everything else. He nodded once and walked away. The Miramar stood around a courtyard shaded by lemon trees. Its proprietor was a woman named Sophia, who appeared to be in her late 30s. She did not recognize Daniel. The relief he felt was so great that he nearly laughed. "Yes," she said, checking her ledger. 3 nights. 3 nights. Room 12. She handed him a brass key. Then she tilted her head. "You're Daniel Vale?" His relief disappeared. "Yes. My mother knew you." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Of course she did." Sophia smiled. "You've had an interesting morning?" "You could say that. My mother is Elena." "The Peach Woman?" "No, that's Marta." "Right. My mother ran this hotel before me. Is she here?" "She lives farther inland now. Arthritis. She doesn't like the harbor steps anymore." Daniel hesitated. "Did I stay here?" Sophia studied him. "You really don't remember?" "No." She leaned against the desk. "You had room 7. Apparently I stayed for 4 months. Almost 5. And nobody finds this impossible?" "Oh, we find it impossible." That answer, more than anything else, reassured him. Sophia reached beneath the desk and removed an old wooden box. "My mother kept these." Inside were postcards, receipts, photographs, old keys, and folded scraps of paper. Sophia searched through them. Finally, she found a photograph. She placed it on the desk. Daniel looked down. 6 people stood on the harbor wall at sunset. Tomas was younger. Marta was there too. A teenage Sophia stood in front, perhaps 16, and beside Tomas stood a young man. Daniel's heart began to beat hard. The photograph had faded slightly, but the face was unmistakable. His face, Daniel at 22, thinner, longer hair, smiling in a way Daniel could not remember ever smiling. He picked up the photograph. On the back in blue ink, someone had written, September 3rd. Daniel's last sunset before the mainland. Come back before you become sensible. Daniel recognized the handwriting. It was his own. He sat down. For a while, Sophia said nothing. Finally, Daniel asked, "Can I keep this?" "It belongs to you more than to us." He carried the photograph upstairs. Room 12 faced the sea. Daniel left his bag unopened and sat on the edge of the bed with the photograph in his hands. He knew where he had been 21 years ago. He could account for that summer. He had spent it in London. He had worked as an intern at an architectural firm from June until August. He remembered the cramped apartment he shared with 2 other students. He remembered riding the underground. He remembered endless afternoons correcting drawings for people who barely learned his name. In September, he returned home. There were photographs, emails, people who remembered him. He had not been on Bellora, and yet there he was. Daniel placed the photograph on the bedside table. Outside, the sea flashed beneath the afternoon sun. He slept for 2 hours. When he woke, the room was golden. For a moment he had no idea where he was. Then he saw the photograph. He went outside. The village was changing with the evening. Tables appeared in the streets. Children chased a ball through the square. Shopkeepers leaned in their doorways. Somewhere a radio played an old song. Daniel walked without deciding where to go. People recognized him. Not everyone. That mattered. Younger residents passed without interest. Visitors ignored him entirely. But among people older than 50, recognition moved ahead of him like a ripple. Some greeted him cautiously. Others embraced him. A fisherman named Paolo asked whether Daniel still drew boats badly. A woman who sold ceramics told him he still owed her for a broken blue bowl. An old schoolteacher named Lucia touched his cheek and began to cry. Daniel did not know what to do with any of it. Eventually, he reached the western side of the village. There, the houses gave way to fields. A road wandered between olive trees toward low hills. Daniel followed it. The evening smelled of dry grass and rosemary. He walked for nearly an hour. At the top of it, he found a ruined stone watchtower overlooking the sea. Someone was sitting on the wall. A woman. She had dark hair streaked with silver and wore a loose white shirt with the sleeves pushed up. She turned as Daniel approached. Unlike everyone else, she did not look surprised. She simply said, "I wondered how long it would take you to come up here." Daniel stopped. "Do I know you too?" "Yes, of course." The woman smiled. "My name is Mara." Daniel sat at the opposite end of the wall. Below them, the sea stretched westward, turning copper beneath the descending sun. "How well did you know me?" Mara looked toward the horizon. "Very well." Daniel waited. She did not elaborate. "Were we friends?" "Yes." "Anything more?" "For a little while." Daniel exhaled. "Wonderful. You asked?" "I know. Mara laughed softly. Daniel studied her profile. There was something about her, not recognition. Again, that strange, almost memory. Did I love you? Mara took her time answering. Yes. Daniel looked down at his hands. And did you love me? Yes. What happened? You left. The words were simple, without accusation. Did I hurt you? Yes. I'm sorry. Mara turned to him. You don't need to apologize for something you didn't do. But apparently I did. Not exactly. Daniel looked at her. Mara watched the last edge of sunlight sink toward the water. Then she said, tomorrow morning, go to the House of Tides. What is that? You'll see. Why can't anyone simply tell me what is happening? Because we don't completely understand it either. Mara, she looked at him. Please. Something in his voice softened her expression. She shifted closer. 21 years ago, you came here, she said. You stayed through the summer. You worked with Thomas. You helped repair fishing sheds after a storm. You drew houses. You taught Sophia to swim beyond the harbor wall. You and I spent an unreasonable amount of time arguing about whether we should leave Bellora. Together? Yes. Where? Anywhere. Daniel smiled despite himself. That sounds practical. We weren't very practical. What happened? You received an offer from an architecture firm in London. Daniel went still. Mara continued. You had applied months earlier. You had forgotten about it. The internship. Daniel remembered the acceptance letter. He had received it in April, not September. At least in his life he had. You had to decide, Mara said. Stay here or go back. And I left. Yes, to London. Yes. Daniel looked out over the sea. That's exactly where I was that summer. I know. How? Because somehow both things are true. The wind moved through the dry grass. Mara stood. The House of Tides opens at sunrise. She started down the path. Daniel called after her. Did I ever come back? Mara stopped. No. Did you wait? She looked over her shoulder. For a while. Then she smiled and there was no bitterness in it. But life is long, Daniel. Longer than we think when we're 22. She continued down the hill. Daniel remained beside the ruined tower until the first stars appeared. That night he dreamed of a house with blue doors. He stood in a courtyard beneath a fig tree. Someone inside was humming. He knew the house belonged to him. He knew there was coffee waiting on a table. He knew that if he opened the blue door, someone he loved would look up. Daniel reached for the handle. Then he woke. The room was dark. For several seconds, the dream remained close. Then it receded. He checked the time. 4:52. Daniel dressed. The village was silent when he stepped outside. A faint blue light had begun gathering over the sea. He followed directions Sophia had written on the back of a receipt. The House of Tides stood on the northern shore, a 40-minute walk from the village. It was not really a house. It was a low stone building built partly into the cliffs. The path descended through wild herbs toward a narrow inlet where the sea entered a cave beneath the building. An elderly woman was waiting outside. She wore a gray dress and had long white hair braided down her back. You're late, she said. Daniel checked his watch. It's 5:43. By 21 years, he sighed. Everyone here is very funny. We have to entertain ourselves. She opened the door. My name is Celia. Inside, the building smelled of salt and beeswax. There were no electric lights. Morning entered through high windows. The main room contained shelves filled with glass bottles, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. Each held seawater. Daniel stared. What is this place? A record. Of what? Choices. Daniel looked at her. Celia walked between the shelves. Bellora sits in an unusual place. Geographically? Not exactly. She selected a bottle. Most places belong firmly to the world that happened. She held the glass toward the growing light. Bellora sometimes remembers the worlds that almost did. Daniel said nothing. Celia smiled faintly. You don't believe me. I'm standing in a room filled with bottled seawater at 6 in the morning because strangers have photographs of a life I didn't live. I'm trying to keep an open mind. Good, she returned the bottle. Have you ever wondered about the life you might have lived if you had made one different choice? Everyone has, yes, but usually those lives vanish. Celia gestured toward the sea beneath the windows. Here, sometimes they leave an echo. Daniel thought of the photograph. What happened 21 years ago? You were supposed to come to Bellora. Supposed to? Poor choice of words. Nothing is supposed to happen. Celia sat beside a long wooden table. You were traveling before your internship began. You had a ferry ticket to Bellora. Daniel frowned. A memory surfaced. Naples. A backpack. A ticket booth. I missed the ferry. Yes. Daniel remembered now. He had overslept after staying out late with other travelers. He arrived at the dock 15 minutes after the ferry departed. The next boat was 2 days later. Instead, Daniel changed his plans and flew to London early. That's it? That was the choice. I didn't choose anything. I missed a ferry. Many important choices look insignificant while we're making them. Celia folded her hands. In the life Bellora remembers, you caught it. Daniel sat opposite her and stayed all summer. Yes, but why does the island remember that life instead of mine? Because you were here. I wasn't. That version of you was. Daniel rubbed his face. This is impossible. Probably, Celia smiled, but impossible things are not always complicated. Outside, waves moved gently into the cave. Daniel looked at the bottles. Do these contain memories? Not exactly. They help us notice them. Can I remember that life? Celia's expression changed. Perhaps. Daniel leaned forward. How? You already are. The meal yesterday. The terrace. Yes. Those weren't memories. What were they? I don't know. Celia nodded. Neither do I. Daniel looked toward the windows. Morning had arrived fully now. What happened to the other me? That is the question Bellora has been waiting 21 years to answer. For the next 2 days, Daniel did not leave. He canceled his return ferry. Then he extended his room at the Miramar. He told himself it was because he needed answers. That was partly true. The other truth was simpler. He liked Bellora. He liked waking to the harbor bells and drinking coffee beneath the lemon trees. He liked the way the island smelled at midday, when the stone walls grew warm and the wind carried thyme from the hills. He liked Tomas's restaurant, where he began eating lunch every afternoon. Most of all, he liked hearing about the man he had almost been. At first, Daniel questioned everyone. He approached the investigation with the habits of his professional life. Dates, names, places. He bought a notebook. On the first page he wrote, Bellora, summer, 21 years ago. Beneath it he made columns. What happened? Who remembers? Evidence. Contradictions. Tomas watched him one afternoon. You did this before. Did what? Turned your life into a spreadsheet without the spreadsheet. Daniel closed the notebook. Apparently some things are consistent. He learned that the other Daniel had arrived with very little money. He had taken a room at the Miramar and planned to stay 2 nights. On his second day, he met Mara. She was 24 then and worked with her father repairing boats. Daniel offered to sketch a new roof for their workshop. The roof leaked. His first drawing was useless. His second was better. The third was actually built. He was stubborn, Mara told him. They were walking along the southern coast when she said it. Daniel had begun spending time with her almost by accident. Or perhaps not. Mara now ran a small workshop restoring old wooden boats. She had never married. Daniel had carefully avoided asking why. Daniel said. Mara glanced at him. You prefer I say you? I don't know. Neither do I. They continued along the path. The sea below was perfectly calm. Was he happy? Daniel asked. Mara considered. Sometimes. That's not what Tomas said. Tomas likes tidy memories. And you don't? I restore old boats. I know that the cracks matter too. Daniel smiled. What was wrong with him? Nothing was wrong with him. What troubled him? That's better. She stopped beneath an olive tree. He was afraid. Of what? Choosing the wrong life. Daniel looked away. That at least belonged to both of them. At 22, Daniel had believed every decision was permanent. Every road not taken seemed like a death, architecture or business, travel or stability, love or independence. He had spent years waiting for certainty. Eventually, life had made many decisions for him simply because he had waited long enough. What did you tell him? Daniel asked. I told him there was no right life. Wise for 24. I was unbearable. Daniel laughed. Mara smiled. Then she added, he didn't believe me. Neither had Daniel, not then. Perhaps not even now. They reached a small beach hidden between cliffs. Mara removed her sandals. You remember this place? No. You hated swimming here. Why? Cold current. Daniel stepped into the water. It was surprisingly cool. He laughed. Mara looked at him. What? Nothing. You're staring. You made exactly the same face. Daniel waded deeper. The water rose to his knees. He turned toward the cliffs, and suddenly he knew there was a narrow underwater shelf 3 steps to his left. He moved. His foot found it. Daniel froze. Mara had seen. You remembered. I knew where the rock was. She came closer. You cut your foot there once. Daniel looked beneath the clear water. A pale stone shelf lay beneath him. His heart was beating quickly, but he was not frightened. He felt something else, grief, not his grief, and yet entirely his. I remember you laughing, he said. Mara's eyes filled with tears. Daniel continued slowly. You had a red swimsuit. Yes. You said I was being dramatic. You were? I was bleeding. Barely. Daniel closed his eyes. The memory disappeared. When he opened them, Mara was standing a few feet away in the clear water. I'm sorry, he said. For what? I don't know. Mara reached for his hand. For a moment they stood there. Then she squeezed his fingers once and let go. That evening, Daniel did not write anything in the notebook. Instead, he sat on the Miramar balcony while the village settled below. He thought about memory. He had always believed memory belonged to the past. Now he wondered whether it might belong to places too. A room remembering laughter, a road remembering footsteps, a harbor remembering the person who once stood there, deciding whether to stay. Over the following days, memories came more easily, never entire scenes, fragments. He remembered the smell of paint in Mara's father's workshop. He remembered sleeping on Tomas's roof during a heat wave. He remembered Sophia at 16, furious because someone had called her a child. He remembered Marta giving him peaches, always yellow, never white. And slowly, another question became more important than how. What happened at the end? Everyone agreed that the other Daniel left Bellora in September. But after that, the story became strange. According to Mara, he boarded the morning ferry. According to Tomas, Daniel promised to return by Christmas. According to Sophia's mother, he left several drawings in room 7. But there were no letters, no postcards, no later visits. It was as though the man who had spent a summer on Bellora ceased to exist the moment the ferry reached the horizon. Daniel returned to the House of Tides. Celia was sitting outside, sorting herbs. What happened to him? Daniel asked. She did not pretend not to understand. He returned to you. What does that mean? Celia placed a sprig of rosemary in a basket. There were never two Daniels. There clearly were. No, she looked toward the sea. There was one life, briefly remembered in 2 ways. Daniel sat beside her. When you missed that ferry 21 years ago, your life continued. London, yes. But Bellora remembered the possibility of your arrival so strongly that for a time, the possibility became memory. How can a place remember something that never happened? How can you remember the smell of your grandmother's kitchen 30 years after the kitchen is gone? That happened. To you, Celia smiled. Places have their own truths. Daniel looked at the water. So the other Daniel was never real. Celia shook her head. Do not make that mistake. But you said, I said there was only one Daniel. I did not say the life remembered here was unreal. She touched his arm. You felt the cold water. You remembered Mara laughing. Daniel was silent. Perhaps a life does not need to become your present in order to belong to you. That evening, Daniel went to see Mara. Her workshop stood beside a quiet inlet beyond the harbor. She was sanding the hull of a small sailboat. I need to ask you something, he said. Mara put down the sandpaper. All right? Why didn't you leave? With you? Yes. She leaned against the boat. We almost did. Daniel waited. The night before your ferry, we packed. We? You had 1 bag. I had 2. You complained. That sounds unfair. It was. Mara smiled. We were going to take the ferry together, then travel north. What changed? You did. Daniel felt a strange ache. What did I say? That you loved me. He waited. And that you didn't know whether loving me meant you should build your whole life around that feeling. Daniel looked down. That sounds terrible. It was actually rather brave. Did it feel brave? No. They both laughed quietly. Mara sat on an overturned wooden crate. You said you needed to discover who you were when you weren't on Bellora. And you let me go. I was furious. Good. I threw a sandal at you. Better. It missed. Unfortunate. Mara laughed. For a moment, she looked 24. Daniel could almost see the young woman inside the older one. Then her expression softened. I thought you would come back. Why didn't he? Because he couldn't. Because he became me. Perhaps. Daniel sat beside her. The workshop door stood open to the evening. Outside, the boat shifted softly. Did you spend your life waiting for someone who never existed? Mara was quiet for a long time. No. Daniel looked at her. I waited for you for perhaps 2 years, she said. Then I became angry for another year. Then I stopped being angry. I loved someone else. His name was Adrian. We had 7 good years together. What happened? He wanted children. I didn't. Daniel nodded. We parted kindly. And after that, many things happened. She smiled. I had a life, Daniel. I know. Do you? Yes. He looked toward the water. I think I'm beginning to. Mara studied him. What about you? What about me? Did you have a life? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. The answer should have been obvious. Of course he had. He had worked, traveled, loved a few times. He had been engaged once at 35 to a woman named Claire. They had ended things gently when both realized they were planning a wedding, mostly because they had already told everyone there would be one. He had friends, a sister, a nephew who sent him terrible jokes. He had apartments in 3 cities and favorite restaurants in each. He had watched his father grow old. He had sat beside his mother during her last weeks and held her hand while she slept. He had known joy, grief, ordinary Tuesdays, Christmas mornings, long flights, bad coffee, unexpected kindness. Yes, he had lived. But somewhere along the way he had started treating his own life like a waiting room. I did, he said. Mara heard the hesitation. But I'm not sure I was always there for it. She nodded. No judgment, only recognition. That was the moment Daniel understood why he liked being with her. She did not treat him as the man who had returned. She did not treat him as the man who had left. She simply allowed him to be the man sitting beside her now. The next morning, Tomas gave Daniel a key. What's this? Your studio. My what? Tomas pointed uphill. Go find it. The key was old brass. Daniel followed the direction Tomas gave him. Above the village, beyond the last row of houses, stood a small abandoned building among olive trees. Not a cottage, an old press house. Long ago, olives had been crushed there. The roof had partially collapsed. One door hung crookedly. Daniel unlocked it. Inside were broken beams, dust, old stone basins, and swallows nesting near the rafters. Against one wall stood a wooden table. Daniel approached. Beneath years of dust, someone had carved initials. DV, he touched them. A memory came. Not a fragment this time. A whole afternoon. He was 22. Sunlight poured through the doorway. Sheets of paper covered the table. Mara sat on the floor eating an orange. Daniel was drawing. Not buildings as they existed, buildings as they might become. A school beside the harbor, a shaded market square, small homes designed to stay cool in summer, a workshop facing north for painters. Mara looked up. What are you going to do with all these? Nothing. Then why draw them? Because I like drawing them. She smiled. Maybe that's enough. The memory vanished. Daniel was standing alone in the ruined press house. His hand rested on the table. He cried. Not dramatically, not even sadly. Tears simply arrived. For the young man who had drawn because he liked drawing. For the older man who had forgotten that liking something could be enough. For every life that disappears quietly while another is being lived. Daniel sat on the dusty floor. Through the broken roof, he could see the blue sky. After a while, someone entered. Mara. She carried a paper bag. Tomas said you'd be here. Daniel wiped his face. What's in the bag? Lunch. Good. She sat beside him. They ate bread, cheese, tomatoes, and olives on the floor. Daniel told her about the memory. She listened. When he finished, Mara said, You drew a house for me once. Did you build it? No. Why not? I didn't want that house. What did it look like? Terrible. Daniel laughed. I thought I was talented. You were. But the house was terrible? Both things can be true. He looked at her. Do you still have the drawing? Can I see it? No. Why? Because you tried to improve it. She was right. They spent the afternoon cleaning the press house. There was no particular reason. Daniel repaired the crooked door. Mara swept. They opened the shutters. By sunset, the place was still a ruin, but it was a pleasant ruin. Daniel stood outside, looking over the island. The village descended toward the harbor. Beyond it, the sea was turning gold. What will you do with it? Mara asked. The building? Yes. Nothing. She smiled. Good. A week passed. Then another. Daniel stopped counting the days since his return ticket expired. He bought shirts from a shop near the square because he had packed only 3. Sophia moved him from room 12 to room 7. Your old room, she said. It was smaller. Daniel preferred it. The window overlooked the lemon courtyard instead of the sea. At night, he could hear people talking downstairs. He began drawing again. At first, only because Thomas asked him to sketch a shade structure for the restaurant. Then Sophia wanted ideas for renovating 2 rooms. Then Paolo wanted a bench designed for the harbor. Daniel warned everyone that he was not an architect. Nobody cared. He drew anyway. His hands remembered more than he expected. One afternoon, Celia visited him at the old press house. Daniel had repaired part of the roof. A large table stood near the windows. Paper covered it. Celia walked around slowly. So? You stayed, for now. She nodded. Daniel poured water into 2 glasses. I've been meaning to ask you something. People usually are. Why now? Celia sat. Why did the island remember me for 21 years and then suddenly pull me back? It didn't pull you. I saw Bellora on a map and felt something. Yes, that seems like pulling. Celia considered. Perhaps calling. Fine. Why call me? I don't know. Daniel smiled. You're disappointing for an island oracle. I've never claimed to be an oracle. What do you claim to be? A woman with too many bottles. They drank water. After a while, Celia said, There is something happening. Daniel waited. The memories are fading. His smile disappeared. What do you mean? Tomas forgot something yesterday. What? The terrace. Daniel frowned. He forgot I designed it? He remembers you. He remembers the summer. But when I asked about the terrace, he said his brother designed it. Daniel sat very still. Is that bad? No. Then why tell me? Because you should understand. Understand what? Bellora does not keep impossible memories forever. Daniel looked around the press house. Will everyone forget me? The other you. Will Mara? Eventually. Something in Daniel resisted that. Can we stop it? Celia shook her head. Why would you? Because it matters. Yes. Then why let it disappear? Celia looked at him gently. Daniel, things can matter without lasting forever. He stared at the drawings. What happens when they forget? The island becomes what it always was. And what was that? A place you had never visited. The fading happened slowly. Marta forgot the broken basket Daniel had once repaired for her. Paolo forgot an argument they had supposedly had over the name of a fishing boat. Sophia's mother looked at the old photograph and could no longer remember who had taken it. The photograph itself began to change. First, Daniel's face became slightly blurred. Then one morning, there were only 5 people standing on the harbor wall. Daniel kept the photograph anyway. The space beside Thomas looked strangely empty. Mara remembered longer than anyone. Perhaps because love leaves deeper marks. Or perhaps simply because she was stubborn. They spent long afternoons together. Sometimes they spoke about the old summer. More often, they did not. Mara showed him how to plane cedar without tearing the grain. Daniel helped her design a new storage loft. They swam at the cold beach. They ate at Tomas's restaurant. They walked inland to a village where bells were still made by hand. They argued about music. They discovered they both disliked overly sweet desserts. They learned each other again, not as they had been, as they were. One evening in late September, they climbed to the ruined watchtower. The season had begun to turn. The air was cooler. Far below, the sea reflected a wide orange sky. Mara sat beside him. I forgot something today. Daniel knew immediately. What? The day we met. He felt a small ache. What do you remember? That we met. Where? I don't know. Daniel nodded. Mara looked at him. Tell me, according to you, your father's workshop. No, tell me what you remember. Daniel closed his eyes. He searched. For several seconds, nothing came. Then, a leaking roof. A young woman with dark hair, a pencil behind her ear. He had said something foolish. She had laughed. Daniel opened his eyes. You had sawdust in your hair. Mara smiled. I probably did. You asked whether I knew anything about roofs. What did you say? I lied. Daniel smiled. Then Mara became quiet. Soon you'll be the only one who remembers. Maybe. And eventually? I don't know. Neither does Celia. Celia knows less than she pretends. She pretends to know nothing. Exactly. Mara leaned her shoulder against his. For a while they watched the sun descend. Then she said, I used to wonder what would happen if you came back. Daniel turned toward her. I imagined it hundreds of ways. Were any accurate? No. What was the best version? You arrived dramatically during a storm. Why? I was 25. Storms seemed romantic. What did I do? You apologized beautifully. For leaving? For everything. That seems exhausting. It was. She smiled. In another version, you arrived married with 6 children. 6? I wanted to be angry. Reasonable. And sometimes you simply walked into the workshop one morning and asked whether I wanted coffee. Daniel considered. I like that one. So do I. He looked at her. Do you want coffee tomorrow morning? Yes. Their first kiss in this life happened without drama. No storm, no music, no declaration. Mara touched his face. Daniel leaned toward her. The kiss was warm and brief and familiar in a way that neither of them tried to explain. Afterward, they sat beneath the changing sky. Daniel did not wonder whether he was recovering an old love or beginning a new one. For once, he did not need to decide what something meant while it was happening. By October, Tomas no longer remembered Daniel's first summer at all. He still remembered meeting him when he arrived in August. He still made the sea bass with orange peel. But when Daniel once mentioned eating it 21 years earlier, Tomas frowned. You weren't here 21 years ago. Daniel looked at him. No. Tomas pointed his fork. I'd remember. Daniel smiled. I'm sure you would. Marta stopped calling him the boy who came back. Sophia found the old hotel ledger. Room 7 had been empty during the summer everyone once remembered Daniel occupying it. The initials on the table in the press house disappeared. The drawings from that other life faded from storage boxes until the pages became blank. Daniel watched all of this with less sadness than he expected, because new things were replacing them. A receipt from Tomas dated yesterday, a sketch Sophia had asked him to sign. A photograph Mara took of him sleeping beneath an olive tree with his mouth open, evidence of this life. One November afternoon, Daniel returned to the House of Tides. The weather had cooled, clouds moved low over the northern sea. Celia was inside. Most of the bottles on one wall were empty. Daniel noticed immediately. What happened? Nothing. They were full. They were. Were those mine? Some. Daniel approached the shelves. One bottle remained. A little seawater rested at the bottom. Celia handed it to him. Last one. Daniel held it toward the window. The water caught the gray light. What memory? The ferry. Which ferry? The one you caught. Daniel closed his eyes, and there it was, 21 years earlier. A young Daniel running down a pier, a boatman shouting. Daniel jumping aboard at the last moment, laughing. The mainland pulling away, the sea opening before him. Bellora appearing on the horizon. Then another memory overlapped it. Daniel waking late, seeing the clock, running toward the harbor, arriving as the ferry disappeared into the distance. Standing breathless on the dock, cursing, buying a coffee, changing his ticket, flying to London. 2 memories, 2 summers, 2 lives. For one impossible moment, Daniel held both. He saw himself meeting Mara. He saw himself working beneath fluorescent lights in London. He saw the cold beach. He saw crowded underground platforms. He saw Thomas's terrace being built. He saw himself drafting financial presentations years later. He saw Mara at 24, Claire at 35, his mother in her final winter, his nephew being born, airports, harbors, meetings, meals, birthdays, empty apartments, wonderful mornings, lonely evenings, everything. Nothing canceled anything else. The life he had lived was not a mistake. The life he had missed was not a tragedy. They simply stood beside each other for one last moment. Then the memory of catching the ferry faded. Daniel opened his eyes. The bottle was empty. Celia took it from him. Well? She asked. Daniel sat down. For a long time he could not speak. Finally he smiled. I missed the ferry. Yes. And I caught it. Yes. And now? Celia placed the empty bottle on the shelf. Now you're here. Daniel laughed softly. That's all? That's quite a lot. Outside, the clouds opened. Sunlight crossed the sea. Daniel stayed on Bellora through winter. Winter on the island was quieter than summer. The tourist cafes closed. Fishing boats were pulled onto shore for repairs. Rain came in brief silver curtains, followed by bright mornings when every leaf seemed polished. Daniel rented a small apartment above a bakery. He returned to the mainland twice, once to collect belongings, once to visit his sister. She listened to his explanation of Bellora with increasing concern. So, she said, an entire island remembers an alternate version of your life. Remembered. And you're moving there. For a while. With a woman you apparently loved in another reality. That part is complicated. It sounds complicated. It's actually becoming surprisingly simple. His sister looked at him. Are you happy? Daniel thought about it. Yes, she nodded. Then I'll reserve judgment until I visit. She came in spring. By then, nobody on Bellora remembered the impossible summer. Not Tomas, not Marta, not Sophia's mother, Not even Mara. Daniel had expected the day Mara forgot him to hurt. Instead, it arrived quietly. They were repairing shutters at the press house. Mara looked up and said, "Didn't you once tell me we had painted shutters together when we were young?" Daniel paused. "Yes." "I don't remember." "That's all right." She studied him. "Do you?" Daniel searched. There was a faint warmth where the memory had been. No picture, no words. "No," he said. Mara smiled. "Good? Good? Now neither of us has an advantage." She handed him the paintbrush. They painted the shutters blue. Not because of Daniel's dream. He had forgotten the dream by then. They simply liked the color. The old press house became a studio. Daniel never formally returned to architecture. He did not need to. He drew buildings. Some were built, some were not. He helped redesign the village clinic. He planned shaded benches along the harbor. He drew a tiny school garden with channels that collected winter rain. When people asked what he did, he usually said, "I draw things." It was enough. Mara continued restoring boats. Sometimes Daniel worked at a table in her workshop. Sometimes she came to the press house. They did not rush to combine their lives. They had already learned what could happen when people tried to decide an entire future at once. Instead, they chose days, coffee, lunch, a walk, Sunday dinner with Thomas, a swim, a trip to the mainland. One day became another. That was how a life formed. In June, almost a year after Daniel arrived, a young traveler came off the ferry. Daniel happened to be sitting near Marta's fruit stall. The traveler was a woman in her 20s carrying a red backpack. She stepped onto the quay and looked around. An elderly fisherman stood suddenly. He stared at her. The woman noticed. "Can I help you?" The fisherman whispered a name. Not hers. The traveler shook her head. "You have me confused with someone." Daniel and Marta looked at each other. Marta raised one eyebrow. Daniel stood. The fisherman was already approaching the traveler, trying to explain something impossible. Daniel remembered how that felt. He walked over. "Welcome to Bellora," he said. The young woman looked relieved to see someone who appeared sane. "Thanks. First time?" "Yes," Daniel smiled. "Good." She frowned. "Why is that good?" "No reason." He took the handle of her suitcase. "Where are you staying?" "The Miramar." "I know the way." They walked toward the blue steps. Behind them, the fisherman was still staring. The young woman glanced back. "That man called me Teresa." "Did he?" "My name is Julia." "Then Julia it is? Do strange things happen here?" Daniel considered. The harbor glittered beneath the afternoon sun. Thomas was setting tables beneath the vines. Somewhere uphill, Mara would be working with the doors open to the sea breeze. The press house windows would be catching the western light. Celia would be sorting bottles or herbs, or perhaps simply sitting beside the northern water, pretending she understood less than she did. "Yes," Daniel said, "sometimes." Julia waited for more. Daniel smiled. "But the coffee is excellent." They continued uphill. Years passed. Not quickly. That was something Daniel learned on Bellora. Years only seemed quick when viewed from the far side. While being lived, they were made of thousands of mornings. There were summers of white sunlight and crowded ferries, autumns when olives dropped onto nets beneath the trees, winters of strong wind and empty streets, springs when the hills turned green almost overnight. Thomas eventually retired. His niece took over the restaurant. She kept the green shutters and the sea bass with orange peel. Marta stopped selling fruit, but still sat beside the stall most mornings, offering opinions nobody had requested. Sophia expanded the Miramar by 4 rooms and complained that Daniel's plans had cost too much. "They were your ideas," he reminded her. "I hired you to stop me from having expensive ideas." "You never said that." "It was implied." Mara's hair became more silver. Daniel's became almost entirely gray. They eventually moved into the same house. Not the house from his forgotten dream. That house had never existed. Their house stood above Mara's workshop. It had broad windows facing east and a long table where they ate breakfast. The roof leaked once. Mara found this extremely funny. "You're supposed to know about roofs," she said. "I draw roofs, apparently badly." They repaired it together. Daniel sometimes thought about the other life. Not often. The memories had disappeared. He could no longer picture the summer Bellora once remembered. He knew the facts because he had written them in the old notebook. But eventually even the facts felt like a story someone had told him long ago. He kept the photograph from the harbor wall. 5 people stood there. There was an empty space beside Thomas. Daniel liked the empty space. It reminded him that absence was not always emptiness. Sometimes it was possibility. Celia died at 93 on a bright April morning. There was no drama to it. She ate breakfast, walked to the sea, sat in her favorite chair outside the House of Tides, and did not rise again. The island buried her on the hillside beneath an almond tree. Afterward, the council asked Daniel and Mara what should happen to the House of Tides. Leave it, Mara said. Daniel agreed, so they did. The bottles remained, some full, some empty. No one appointed a new keeper. Perhaps none was needed. Travelers still came. Most stayed a few days. Some returned every summer. A few arrived to discover that someone remembered them. Daniel became good at recognizing the expression. Confusion, suspicion, wonder. He never explained too quickly. He would buy them coffee. He would ask what they had been called. He would tell them about Celia. Sometimes the island remembered marriages that never happened, friendships never formed, businesses never opened, children never born, journeys never taken. Usually the memories faded within days. Once they lasted 3 years. Daniel stopped trying to understand the rules. There might not have been any. One late summer afternoon, many years after his first arrival, Daniel sat outside Tomas's old restaurant. Mara was across the square talking with Sophia. The harbor was busy. A ferry approached from the mainland. Daniel watched it turn slowly toward the quay. Passengers gathered near the rail. For one moment he remembered being 43, a canvas bag over his shoulder, a paper map in his pocket, unsure why he had come. The memory was ordinary, completely his. The ferry docked. People stepped ashore, couples, families, a man with a bicycle, a woman carrying a sleeping child. Nobody recognized anyone they shouldn't. Daniel smiled. He was glad. Mara returned and sat beside him. What are you looking at? The ferry? Anything interesting? Not yet. She ordered 2 coffees. They sat in the shade. Daniel looked around the square. He knew every doorway, every crack in the fountain, every tree that gave good shade in August. Children ran past who had known him their entire lives. To them, Daniel was not the traveler who had returned after 21 years. He was simply Daniel. The man who drew the clinic. The man who lived above the boat workshop. The man who complained about white peaches. The man who could usually be persuaded to fix a chair even though he insisted he did not know how. It occurred to him that this was what he had wanted from the island when he first arrived. Proof. Proof that he had been there. Proof that another life had belonged to him. Proof that he had once been someone different. He no longer placed a hand over his. What? What? Daniel realized he was smiling. Nothing. You're doing that thing. What thing? Thinking something sentimental and pretending you aren't. I never do that. You constantly do that. He turned his hand beneath hers and linked their fingers. All right. What were you thinking? Daniel looked toward the harbor. The ferry was departing again. Its wake widened behind it in 2 long white lines. I was thinking that when I first came here, everyone remembered me. Mara smiled. I remember that. No, I mean before, she thought for a moment. Oh, the old story. She knew it, though she no longer remembered living any part of it. And now, she asked. Daniel looked at her. Now I remember them. The ferry passed beyond the harbor wall. The sea closed behind it. That evening they walked home slowly. The heat had softened. Shadows stretched across the stone streets. Someone was cooking garlic nearby. A radio played through an open window. At the fountain, Marta sat on a bench telling 2 children how the village had looked before either of their parents were born. They listened with the solemn attention children sometimes give to old people's stories. Daniel and Mara climbed toward their house. At the top of the steps they stopped. The island spread below them. White houses, green shutters, terraces, olive trees. The small harbor holding the last light. Beyond it, the Mediterranean stretched toward places Daniel had once believed contained the life he was supposed to find. He had traveled far looking for that life. He had nearly found it in careers, in cities, in relationships, in plans. Then an island had remembered a man he had never become. For a while, Daniel had thought the gift was being allowed to see what he had missed. Much later, he understood otherwise. The gift was discovering that no life was made only from the roads taken. Every person carried quiet coastlines within them. Doors not opened, journeys postponed, people almost met, words almost spoken. Those unlived possibilities did not make the life that happened smaller. They gave it shape. Mara squeezed his hand. Dinner? Yes. Tomas's? We went yesterday. And? Daniel smiled. Tomas's. They walked down another street toward the restaurant. Above them, windows opened to the evening. People called greetings. Someone he turned automatically. For a second he wondered which Daniel they meant. The young man who had caught the ferry, the young man who had missed it, the traveler who came 21 years later, the man who stayed. Then he saw Sophia waving from across the square. Daniel, tell Mara I found those tiles. Mara called back. I can hear you. Sophia laughed. Daniel laughed too, and just like that, the question disappeared. There had never been a need to choose between the men he might have been. All of them had brought him, in their own impossible way, to this warm evening. The restaurant tables waited beneath the vines. The first stars appeared over the harbor. Mara walked beside him, and Bellora, which had once remembered him before he arrived, held no impossible memories of Daniel Vale anymore. It did not need to. He had finally given the island something simpler to remember. He had stayed.